Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mohammed Kato. I'm leader of the Game Above College of Engineering and Technology. Welcome all of you to this first TechTalk series that we're going to have in the college. And we are extremely happy to have Mr. Paul Perrone with us today. To give you some background, Paul is the founder and CEO of Perrone Robotics. I listened to him this morning. He said, for the last 19 years, I was breathing and living autonomous vehicle. But he is a pioneer in the autonomous vehicle space with nearly 2 decades of experience that has included leading a team for the DARPA Grand Challenge in 2005 and 2007 and chairing the Society of Automotive Engineers Autonomy Committee that defined the levels of autonomy for industry. Paul has led Perrone Robotics for pioneering AV autonomous vehicle research and development work to a venture backed and revenue generation organization activity, fielding autonomous vehicles for transit agencies, Fortune 100 companies and defense organizations alike. Paul Perrone.
Oh, thank you very much. I think I've got a mic. Thank you very much. Well, I'm really excited to be here. As you know, Perrone Robotics, we're linked with Eastern Michigan University on some projects, and so glad some of the folks involved with these projects are here as well. So thank you for coming. It's a great thrill to be working with you all in this exciting field. And autonomous vehicles, or AVs, as we like to abbreviate it. You always have to give acronyms to something in engineering, right? So now we've got AVs, another acronym to remember, and there's a few more in this presentation I'll share with you. But they're really interesting to people because, and they've always been interesting to me. I've always loved robotics, artificial intelligence, as do many, because it's intellectually, stimulating. There's like you're exploring the boundaries of trying to take what we do, how we think and how we act, and translate it into machinery, and that's interesting. That's exciting. And then throw on top of that cars, and now it's cool. Right? Because so it's a wonderful blend of technologies, and specifically I wanted to talk a little bit about AVs on campuses, and I was trying to think back to the early years. Our first, I was involved with the 2005 DARPA Urban Challenge, which was a race set up by an arm of the Pentagon called DARPA to navigate through the Mojave Desert. Well, in 2007, they regrouped and they held out a $2 million prize for someone who could build an autonomous vehicle, meaning nobody on board. There's nobody. Oh, I get to use the pointer that I usually just torment my cat with. Point to that vehicle there. That's Tommy Jr. There's nobody inside. And the objective was to build an autonomous vehicle, a driverless vehicle, that could navigate over 60 miles of an urban environment, which was a bunch of roads. It was actually this, at the time, really an abandoned Air Force base called the George Air Force Base in Victorville, California. And, but you can see there, it was very much like a campus. I mean, there were homes, there were different types of roads, there was a stadium and all kinds of things that you would encounter in a campus environment like this. Or any sort of environment where you have people and services operating in sort of a community-based fashion. So, as you can see, there were the technology those days that you had these huge sensor arrays on top of these vehicles. It was really the early days, 2007. This was, and a lot of the companies that were involved, or organizations and universities. We're just really exploring this concept of autonomy for the first time, but it was all done in this sort of campus environment. And now it's exciting to be again working with some of you all here at Eastern Michigan University in the College of Engineering to bring some of this technology to your campus and to campuses like this. So I'll just back up for one moment and also define what do we mean now by AVs? What is an AV? A lot of people think of Tesla or the Google car, the Waymo car. But when we're talking about the kinds of autonomous vehicles that we're creating, they are vehicles that drive themselves. But now the SAE, the Society of Automotive Engineers, has defined levels of autonomy, levels 1 through 5, and they've sort of redefined level 4 as those vehicles that can drive themselves within a designated operational design domain. Level 5 is anywhere, anyhow, and that's a long way off. But level 4 is on a driverless vehicle that can operate in a designated ODD, operational design domain, which defines really the environment and how complex it is. Is it just a straight road going around a loop with some barriers on the side, simple to autonomously navigate, or is it a busy campus or urban environment perhaps where you've got pedestrians and folks crossing in front of the vehicle, you've got a lot of traffic, you may have rerouting and emergency vehicles and all kinds of things that you have to deal with that make that ODD more complex. And that really drives the functions and the things that you put onto the vehicle for the AV to operate in that ODD. Otherwise, you're going to have a situation where you have manual takeovers. A lot of the pilot programs that you'll see, this vehicle here doesn't have anybody on board. It was driving on our facility. So it was a test track, and we were able to operate that in a driverless fashion. But when you're operating in these other environments, you'll typically see an operator on board. And they'll be in the driver's seat, and they'll be doing the look, ma, no hands thing, right? Not touching the wheel. But they're there to take over because in some cases, these vehicles are being deployed in environments for which they were not intended, or there's unintended things that are going on. And so that's the reality of deployments. Sometimes you encounter a situation where you're planning and you've got this idyllic environment, you're looking at a picture like this, oh, that's going to be easy to navigate, there might be little pink unicorns running around, and this is just a wonderful, glorious environment, and everything is wonderful. But then all of a sudden, you know, in the actual real world, you're like, oh my gosh, I've got to deal with this. I've got these barriers to deal with. Traffic's being rerouted. There are vehicles pulling out in front of me, and so while you may have a desire to have vehicles that drive themselves in this situation, and they have operators, there's an abundance of ODD and operator deviations when these things sometimes get deployed, and so you're operating outside of what you presumed. You might be thinking that, but it's really this, what the ODD is. There's no standard for defining what the operational design domain, or at least a firm agreed upon standard for what an ODD is, and how to classify these things so that you can say, well, my vehicle operates in a Class A ODD, or a Class B, or a Class C or D. That doesn't exist yet, right? There are some folks out there who are trying to define that, so it's an interesting research area where I think there could be some well thought out ways to help define this, but also there's some organizations working on it, but it's still not defined. And then the other situation is you get into this situation where you deploy a vehicle, and then the customer or whoever it is that you're working with, they start to see this vehicle moving around, and everything's working. They're like, oh, now we want to go to the stadium or to this location, and then you're like, yeah, sure. Oh, but there's things that you're now encountering that you didn't sort of conceive of, and now you might be operating outside of what that vehicle was defined for, and that's the situation with level 4 autonomous vehicles. It's within a specified ODD. So as a result, you may have operators that take over as a matter of course. Oh, I'm coming up to an intersection, I'm just going to take over here. Or they might fail to take over when needed, and you don't want that, right? So there's this sort of play between not taking over enough, or when you need to, and maybe taking over too much. So the question is, how do we deploy an AV that is actually autonomous? How do we do that? So we'll get to that, and we'll get to it specifically for for campuses, but just thinking about some of the opportunities for autonomy in campuses. A few of them are listed here. In fact, I was talking to some folks today, and there's another one that came up, so I'll add that to the mix. But one is events and tours and VIP activities. This is one of maybe the simpler applications, because you're deploying this in a very specific, defined demonstration route, and it's a showcase opportunity. It might be doing a tour of the campus, but you have an operator there, and so your ODD might be simplified. And then you have some other opportunities are when you have students and faculty get involved in these actual projects. How do we integrate research ideas and augment the vehicle? Does the vehicle with which we're working lend itself to that and allow that too, right? So these are interesting aspects of AVs to kind of bring some of the interesting topics from students and faculty into the autonomous vehicle. And now what's operating on campus has some of these new features and functions that were not previously part of the vehicle. It might even expand its realm of operation. Maybe you've added the deer detector sensing technology that now lets you run down a road where there's a bunch of deer jumping out in front of you. And I really need that, by the way, if anyone's working on that. I've had bad experiences. But then there's the transport of goods and things. It's an application where you might be transporting food or laundry or things like that across campus for facilities and maintenance. Back office personnel transit, maybe you have a remote parking lot that's taking personnel to a destination where they can walk in the front doors without getting wet because it's raining outside or it's very cold, and that's a useful application. Or just what we call the front office campus-wide transit application. Students and faculty, you've got AVs everywhere, and you're just ride-hailing the AV, and it comes and picks you up, and you go to where you want to go. So those are some of the opportunities. So how do you implement this in a campus environment, or really to some extent any environment? It's very important to think up front about phasing in your where you're going to run it, your ODDs. Start out with something maybe simple. I'm just going to run it around this route. Become familiar with how the vehicle operates, what it does, what it might not do, and become very familiar with its operation in a safe sort of mode and environment. Then you might have some intermediate ODDs, and then ultimately you have your target ODD. I want to go, from GACET front door to parking lot or some dorms and student residences. It's important to pilot the operation with some operators at first. So you're going to have a pilot operations phase, and then you get to what most people think of is where you have many of these vehicles running around, and you have ride hailing, and you have scale of these autonomous vehicles operating on your campus and your environment in these proven ODDs, because now you know it works. And it's very important to have support. These aren't commodity type vehicles. These are things that have complexities, and you might even be running it on a novel vehicular platform that itself is new and is not like a regular just car that you might buy off of, or a transit van that you might buy off of a lot. These are new things, and so you really need the support of the organizations that are supplying this, so that you can get past certain issues. So all these things are important in considering deployment of an AV. So of course, we just basically talked about this. The key ingredients are you have to have a rollout plan. You want to think about how you're going to roll this out in a safe fashion. You need the vehicle itself, the autonomous vehicle. It may be a vehicle with an AV kit that gets installed. That's something that's what we do. Or you might have a vehicle that has the kit integrated inside. like the Ollie vehicle with which the Locomotors Ollie vehicle that's down here on the campus, and we work with Locomotors to supply our technology from the factory, from the Locomotors factory. Then once armed with a rollout plan and an autonomous vehicle, now you got to figure out now you got to do the mapping. You got to drive the vehicle typically, or drive a vehicle with some technology on board to create the map of the environment in which you want this vehicle to operate. For some companies, this can take, believe it or not, this could take a month. For others, it could take a day. Right? We've been working on some ways to make it super simple. Obviously, the more complex environment, the more complex the map you're going to have to create. But there's a mapping phase where you're driving the vehicle around and creating the invisible fence, if you will, and getting the vehicle acclimated to the roads and that it needs to be aware of as it's driving. Operations, you're going to initially have operators on board. So when you have one vehicle, you're going to have an operator. You're either going to have they're going to be folks who work at the university, or you might have a third-party service who are your operators. But if you have one vehicle and one operator, that person gets sick, you're going to need two operators. And then as soon as you have two operators, you're probably going to need someone to manage them, to call the other person when the first person is out, to make them aware that they need to come in today and be the concierge or the operator of the vehicle. And then also maintenance. Is this something that things break, sensors down, something's not working. If you have a maintenance plan with the organization, or you're going to be trained to maintain the vehicle and some of the technology itself. And then, of course, when you go beyond what the maintenance plan tells you to do, you have the support of the organization, and then integration support if the company is going to support that, like our project where we support integration efforts with EMU. So what are some of the considerations and options? We're very proud to be working with this beauty here, this Locomotors Ollie vehicle, which is really the future, this futuristic looking shuttle that you all now have here on your campus. We're working with Locomotors to field these and working with the students and faculty here to ultimately bring some other technology into that vehicle platform. There are other vehicle platforms depending on interests. If regular transit vans are of interest, or if you need what's called FMVSS compliance, which is Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, where they're licensed to run on public roads, or in some cases you might need a special waiver to run them on public roads. If that's important, and ADA compliance for wheelchair lifts and other things like that, that drives what choice of vehicles that you have and you bring into the environment. Whether or not it's electric or internal combustion driven, most of the vehicles with which we're working are electric. Electric is green, it's clean, it's great for the climate. They tend to be right now a little more expensive, and they require some maintenance. So some of the EVs are newer, so you have to be ready and prepared and make conscious decisions to be able to maintain those vehicles. The good news is, I think EVs are actually easier they're simpler by design, so they can be easier to fix in some cases. So these are all things that one needs to consider, as well as, is it a demo vehicle? Is it a research vehicle? Is it actually going to be utilitarian and transport goods and people on campus? These are all the things that drive which kind of vehicle you choose. And for example, we work with some of these different vehicles. We've got our kit embedded in the Locomotors Ollie shuttle, and then we can retrofit vehicles like these, which are these are utility vehicles that can carry things and transport goods around. There's also the application, because this question came up today, can you put a forklift on, or not a forklift, a snowplow on these vehicles? Because we've got bad weather up here in Michigan, and sometimes it snows, and so, well, indeed, that could be a perfect application for some of these vehicles that you see here, and these are also all considerations for what you're going to be bringing into a program when you go to deploy these. And so once you've successfully completed a pilot, once you've you feel like you've got a safe choice of operations and vehicle platforms and technology, and you're meeting what you want to do for the ODD, you're going to start thinking about what's my path to driverlessness. What's my driverless roadmap? You're going to start out with an operator behind the wheel, but then the operator, once you develop a certain level of comfort, may sit inside the vehicle as a passenger with an e-stop button, ready to stop things. Then, as you gain more comfort with the ODD and how you're operating this, then you're going to go into a situation where now you have to have tools for remote monitoring, fleet management tools, so that you can, in the event of an issue or a failure, or somebody has a medical event or whatever, you need to have a service, either internal or provided by a party that's monitoring what's going on, so that you can shut a vehicle down, send a recovery vehicle to go pick up the passengers and recover the vehicle and the people on board. And then, of course, there's remote teleoperation, to be able to remotely control the vehicle at some slow speed from a remote distance as necessary too. That's an advanced remote monitoring and control function. And so all of this relates to, or drives some of the tools that you need for fleet management. You're going to have some central dispatch tool, which is monitoring the network of AVs that you have out there in the field. You're going to need ride-hailing apps. When you have one vehicle, usually you don't have ride-hailing, but when you have many vehicles, right now you have something functional, and you're going to want to have ride-hailing capabilities, so that if it's a passenger oriented vehicle, they can request the vehicle to come pick them up at a particular location and take them to another location. And then in the middle is your safety planning. There's regulatory compliance issues to deal with and consider. In certain states, in California, you can't have a driverless vehicle or an autonomous vehicle that's over 10,000 pounds. So transit bans don't work there. But Michigan, it's a different story. These are all there's different states have different rules, so you've got to be familiar with those. Make sure that you can operate these on the public road before you start taking it out on the public road. It may need a special a waiver. It may need, depending on the vehicle platform that you've chosen, it may need you may need to show some proof of certification, vehicle certification, as well as maybe is the AV technology itself safety certifiable and certified. There is no definitive standard right now that says here's what you have to prove for your AV safety here in the U.S. aside from you providing the documentation as to what tests were done, or the vendor of this, the supplier of this technology, saying here's the test that we've performed, and you're kind of saying, well, that looks pretty good, but you might want to get a third party to also take a look at it as well. And then insurance. You're going to need any organization who's supplying these vehicles and the organizations deploying them will need insurance. But after all, these things are put into place, and the idea here is really just to stress the point that it's not as easy as just getting an autonomous vehicle and putting it on the road. There's a lot of things that you need to consider, from planning to these compliance issues and other things, to make sure that you have a safe and reliable autonomy experience. But at the end of the day, with the right plan, you have vehicles that drive themselves and satisfy some of these use cases that are of interest to you, campuses and environments such as Eastern Michigan University, for events and tours, research AV platforms. Does the vehicle supplier support that? Transport of goods, personnel, and of course campus-wide transit. And then one day you'll see autonomous vehicles operating in and about this campus, and people will take it for granted. You won't even think that there was a day where you actually had to do something like get into a car and put your hands on the steering wheel and drive it. That what is a steering wheel? My son asked me, "What's a phone?" Right? What's a wall phone? And what's a payphone? What is that? Right? Well, we'll be asking, what's a steering wheel? What are these foreign things, these concepts that we've never heard of? And so we'll just be driving and be driven safely and autonomously and be able to get to point A to point B with AVs. So thank you very much.